Good morning. Hey, Bob. How are you? Nice to see you. Maybe I'll put this right here. It's kind of you. Would you like some?
Thank you. Okay, I think we're ready to start. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mireya Solís. I'm the director of the Center for Asia Policy Studies and the Philip Knight Chair in Japanese Studies at the Brookings Institution. Thank you very much for joining our discussion today that will examine the state of the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific Strategy 2 years after it was launched. The Indo-Pacific remains one of the most important regions for America's security, prosperity, and technological innovation. There have been a lot of shifts, however, in the region and around the world. We're thrilled to have Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, Daniel Kritenbrink, at the Brookings Institution to shed some light on how the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy is adapting to these changing times. Assistant Secretary Daniel Kritenbrink, am I not pronouncing it right?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, Mireya.
Has been a member of the United States Foreign Service since 1994.
I'm very old.
Prior to his current position, he's previously represented the United States as ambassador to Vietnam, as Senior Director for Asian Affairs at the National Security Council, and as Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. Co-moderating this discussion with me is my colleague, Dr. Tanvi Madan, who is a Senior Fellow in the Center for Asia Policy Studies at the Brookings Institution. Tanvi's research interests include India's domestic and foreign policy and its role in the Indo-Pacific and the world. Following our conversation, we will open the discussion to the audience for questions and answers. And a quick reminder that we are live and on the record. Now, Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink, there's a lot to discuss today.
There is.
So why don't we get started?
Okay.
And I'm going to ask about priorities. And the reason I bring this up is that there are wars raging in Ukraine and the Middle East. So given the urgency of these crises, why should we focus, why should we invest resources and have this focus on the Indo-Pacific at this moment?
Well, first of all, Mireya, thank you so much for having me, and to you and to Tanvi and all of our friends here at Brookings. I'm really grateful for the tremendous research that you do, but also for providing a venue like this for us to have this great conversation. I really appreciate your flexibility in choosing today's date. Here's what I would say, Mireya, specifically in response to your question. We believe that the Indo-Pacific is central to America's security and prosperity. We think much, if not most, of the history of the 21st century is going to be written in this region. And let me just give you a few stats. In the Indo-Pacific, you have half the world's population, 60% of the world's economy, 2/3 of all economic growth over the last 5 years. You've got $2 trillion in investment in trade between the United States and the region. $1 trillion in American investment in the region, and $1 trillion of regional investment in the United States. All of that supports 3 million jobs here. So we think really the Indo-Pacific is absolutely central going forward. The second point that I would make, Mireya, is increasingly we see all of the world's regions being interconnected. We think what happens in Europe is inextricably linked to Asia as well. I often talk about some of the things that have surprised me in being the Assistant Secretary for East Asia Pacific Affairs. One of the biggest surprises I've had is the amount of time I spend with European partners working on Asian-related issues, and conversely, the amount of time I've spent with Indo-Pacific partners focused on European security affairs, especially the conflict in Ukraine. And I think our partners in the Indo-Pacific, they recognize clearly that what happens in Europe has a huge impact on Asia and vice versa. And I think that's why most of them have stepped up in such an unprecedented way, I think, to support Ukraine and to resist Russian aggression there.
Thank you very much.
Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink, one of the things that happened when Russia invaded Ukraine was that a document from the administration that was released around that time didn't get as much attention as it would have otherwise. And that was the Indo-Pacific Strategy, which was released over 2 years ago. It had a number of objectives: advancing free and open Indo-Pacific, deepening connections in and beyond the region, bolstering security, regional prosperity, and building resilience against transnational threats.
That's very good.
I try. And one of the questions I have is, if you had to kind of do a report card of sorts, where do you think progress has been made on towards these objectives, and where do you think there's work still remaining to be done?
Tanvi, great question. Look, I was really honored to be with Secretary Blinken when we first announced and formally launched the Indo-Pacific Strategy in Fiji, and we were trying to make a point in announcing the strategy in the region and specifically in the Pacific Islands. I think you've laid out very well the 5 pillars of the strategy, right? We're focused on ensuring that the Indo-Pacific remains free and open, connected, secure, resilient, and prosperous. That's our focus. But I think, for me, the most important and exciting and innovative feature of the strategy is the fact that increasingly we're focused on building the collective capacity of allies, partners, and friends. We recognize that in facing these unprecedented challenges of the 21st century, not only are we unable to grapple with these challenges alone, but we're so much more effective if we do so together with like-minded allies, partners, and friends. And I think it's investing in the capacity of those allies, partners, and friends, increasingly working together with those partners to invest in the capacity of others. And then perhaps the single most exciting part of it is networking all of those various relationships. We started, of course, by focusing on our 5 treaty alliances, and I think I would argue that all of those alliance relationships are stronger than they've ever been before. Japan, Korea, Philippines, Australia, Thailand. But increasingly, we've networked those relationships. We talk about building a lattice work of informal and formal relationships across the region. You think about the Quad, AUKUS, the tremendous progress we made in trilateral cooperation between the United States and Japan and Korea, as represented by the Camp David Summit. The unprecedented leadership trilateral we just did between the United States, Japan, and the Philippines. I think that's the wave of the future. That's probably the most exciting part of the Indo-Pacific Strategy from my perspective, and I think it will continue to be going forward. I do want to underscore, Tanvi, though, that we're not focused on just having these diplomatic events. When we get together with allies and partners, we're focused primarily on delivering tangible results for the region. Delivering security and prosperity through, for example, increasing maritime domain awareness across the region through the AUKUS arrangements, providing a significant submarine capacity to Australia, and then working, which will contribute to peace and stability across the region. You see trilateral, quadrilateral military exercises. You see us working together to invest in infrastructure across the region. I think for me, maybe the single most exciting part of the Prime Minister Kishida's state visit and the follow-on trilateral meeting with the Philippines was the work we announced together to invest in connectivity across the Pacific Islands, building undersea cables. Or you think about the partnership we announced to build the Luzon corridor in the Philippines. You think about delivering 400 million COVID-19 vaccines across the region, right, through the Quad. I think that's the kind of work, that networked, collaborative work together with allies and partners, delivering tangible benefits across the region that benefits the region and the American people. That's probably the place where we've accomplished the most. But if you walk through all the pillars of the strategy, I think you could argue we're making tremendous progress in building prosperity across the region through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and our hosting of APEC. Certainly, I've mentioned already that our security alliances, I think, are stronger than ever. We're building resilience through not just our work in countering pandemic disease, but also combating climate change. But for all of those successes, I would say, thank God that we've had those successes and that our allied and partner relationships are stronger than they've ever been before, because I think the challenges we face are also unprecedented. And that list is also pretty long. From the transnational threats I've already mentioned to the fact that the People's Republic of China represents the only country really with the intent and the means to challenge the international order, to the nexus that you see between Moscow and Beijing and how destabilizing that is, the threats emanating from North Korea, and of course the situation in Myanmar. So the challenges are significant. I think the success of our strategy puts us in the best position to deal with them.
I think it's interesting, given the different nature of challenges from, for example, Europe after the Second World War, when we saw kind of collective security being developed. I often think in the Indo-Pacific what we're seeing is collaborative security being developed with other countries as well, taking initiatives. One of the things you do here, if others outside are kind of totting up a report card, they do talk about, in terms of work left to be done, the budgetary side. And there is the Washington quip, show me your budget and I'll show you your strategy. Do you think that the Biden administration's budgetary requests adequately reflect the Indo-Pacific as a priority? And what are the challenges in terms of getting more resources for the region?
Well, the simple answer is I do. I think this has probably been the best time in the world to be the Assistant Secretary for the East Asia Pacific Bureau at the State Department. Our budget has increased each year that I've been in this job. We've added more than 50 new positions across the department, and the foreign assistance and diplomatic engagement budget has increased each year as well. You can tune in over the next month or so. You'll see me up on Capitol Hill defending the Indo-Pacific budget for the year ahead. But what I'll walk through at that point is the President's FY25 budget request will be unprecedented. The President is asking for $8 billion to invest across the Indo-Pacific. That's $4 billion in discretionary funding to fund our embassies and our diplomatic engagement platforms, but also to fund significant foreign assistance that advances all the interests that I've talked about as well. That's on the discretionary side. On the mandatory side, it's quite unprecedented. We're requesting $2 billion for an international infrastructure fund and $2 billion to advance our economic and connectivity goals across the region. But even apart from that $8 billion request, I do want to highlight as well, really grateful to congressional leadership for approving the $7.1 billion to support the Compacts of Free Association, which support our really historic partnerships with the 3 freely associated states across the Northern Pacific. Grateful to Congress as well for the $2 billion security supplemental for the Indo-Pacific that we're working on right now. And just last year, we announced $600 million to support the South Pacific Tuna Treaty. So we are flowing real resources in the region. And maybe just one final example of that. The State Department is not always known for being the world's fastest, most nimble organization, but in the span of just 1 year, we've opened 2 new embassies in the Pacific Islands, in the Solomons and in Tonga. We will open imminently in the next few weeks in Vanuatu, and we're working to open in Kiribati as well. So my simple answer is yes. Look, this is a challenging budget environment, but I'm grateful to work for a president and administration that has prioritized the Indo-Pacific. And again, I remain extremely grateful for congressional leadership, which has been just incredibly supportive across the board. And again, I'm a diplomat. I believe in engagement across the board, but we have to flow real resources to the region to back up that diplomacy to make it real. And I think that's exactly what we're doing.
Well, thank you. If I can jump in, this has been really a fascinating discussion. I want to go back to the question of collective capacity, because to me, one of the most compelling elements of the Indo-Pacific strategy is this desire, this recognition that the United States can be most effective if it works with others in many different areas. And I think that we're beginning to see the results of that. But working together also presents challenges, right?
Sure.
So my question goes to areas of alignment and divergence that the United States may have with allies and partners. The Indo-Pacific strategy, there have been other regional actors who have also issued their own Indo-Pacific strategy. So I wonder if you could talk about where do you see the greatest areas of convergence when we think about how the United States is working with partners? What are the most divisive issues, and how do you work through both tapping on opportunities where there is shared interest and then overcoming potential differences in approach, in tactics, in timing even?
Yeah, Mireya, great question. Look, I'll be very honest with you. What I sense and live every day really is the tremendous convergence, I think, between our strategies and our views and approaches towards the region. I talk about investing in the collective capacity of allies, partners, and friends, but increasingly that means getting together with these like-minded partners and investing in the capacity of others. I think about Japan, which in many ways I think owns the trademark for free and open Indo-Pacific, and we're grateful to them for that. But you see similar sentiments and strategic outlooks contained in the Indo-Pacific strategies for the Republic of Korea, for India, for Indonesia. Quite frankly, the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy of ASEAN itself. So for me, again, I see tremendous convergence. When we get together with partners, we talk about, we want to live in a region, we want to defend and support a region where all countries, large and small, play by the same rules, where large countries don't bully the weak, where all countries can make their own sovereign decisions free from coercion. Hopefully where individuals on a daily basis in their personal lives are able to make those same decisions freely. That's the kind of vision that I think almost every country that we talk to in the region, that's the vision that they share, that they ascribe to. Everywhere I go as well, everyone wants to start talking about China. I always underscore to friends in the region that we have a regional strategy of which China is a part and not the other way around, and that our emphasis is on what we're talking about here, our affirmative vision for the kind of region that we want to build and defend, and that's where we spend the vast majority of our time. I think I've never seen such tremendous strategic alignment and convergence. I've never seen such a strong demand signal for American engagement and leadership as well. And as I indicated earlier, really grateful for that because I think the challenges we face are also unprecedented. Now, Mireya, you asked me to talk about some of the divergences. I don't see those being huge challenges on a daily basis with our allies and partners. There are always differences, right? But I think through the dialogue channels that we have with allies and partners and this network of friends and allies that we built, we've worked through them very well, and we spend the vast majority of our time focused on common challenges.
You mentioned the network, or as you also labeled it, the lattice work.
My favorite word.
I often say, if you're Australian, you know what a lattice work is because your buildings often have them, but I wonder how it translates, that particular word, in the region. And so I've heard network used a lot more as...
I started using network because I had too many friends in the region say, what's a lattice work?
It could be a task for an enterprising young scholar to kind of find the translation of lattice work in every regional language. Part of that has been, you mentioned the alliances and partnerships, is a proliferation of kind of issue-based or interest-based groupings, mini-laterals, we can call them. I know some call them coalitions, but we've seen a number of them. I think you mentioned the Quad and AUKUS. I'll take the Quad just to ask you the question of, take us into that room, the Quad. For those, I'm assuming all of you, if you're here, you know what the Quad is, but for those online or otherwise who don't, it's Australia, India, Japan, and the US in a mini-lateral. What is the dynamic like? What are the issues that most animate discussion? And what is kind of the future agenda for a group like that? And then just in terms of a couple of potential kind of challenges, I guess, for want of a better word, we talk a lot about coordinating amongst the Quad partners. How do you coordinate across all these various mini-laterals as new ones come on? How do you sustain the momentum of kind of older ones like the Quad?
Tanvi, great question. Maybe I'll talk at a macro level first and then address specifically the Quad question. You're right that we focus a lot on building this lattice work or network of relationships. And we always talk, you're building all of these different groupings, you're putting them together. When you lay them across the region, that's how you form the lattice work. And I think your point, too, is that many of these are informal and ad hoc. But I also should underscore, and I neglected to do at the outset, when we talk about investing in the collective capacity of allies, partners, and friends, we're also very conscious about investing in the region's formal architecture as well. In ASEAN, as an institution, and the 10, soon to be 11 members of ASEAN, and also in the Pacific Island Forum as well. And I think we can't underscore enough just how important those formal institutional groupings are, especially for friends in Southeast Asia and across the Pacific. And because increasingly ASEAN is really the only formal architecture in the region, it becomes the mechanism by which all countries in the region get together. But as I indicated in my answer to your earlier question, the probably most exciting and impactful work has been related to these more informal groupings. I love working on the Quad. My colleague, Deputy Assistant Secretary Camille Dawson, is here. She is our main coordinator on the Quad. She meets at least monthly with Quad counterparts because Secretary Blinken's obsession with the Quad is it has to deliver tangible results. I mean, we've met at the leader level. We've had Quad leader level meetings, I think, 5 times. We met at the foreign ministerial level 6 times. You'll see more meetings this year. But his, again, focus and obsession and demand is that we produce tangible results. What I love about having participated in these meetings, first of all, is to hear the leaders and the ministers talk about our shared objectives and views on the region. This gets to the convergence question that Mireya was asking about. I've heard some of the most succinct and powerful descriptions of the challenges that we face across the region in these meetings, and that's helped shape our common view of how to approach these challenges. But in delivering on Secretary Blinken's demand that we actually produce tangible results, Camille and her team in particular, together with our colleagues in the South Central Asia Bureau as well, and my good friend, Assistant Secretary Don Liu, we focused on, for example, I mentioned delivering 400 million COVID-19 vaccines to the region and a total of 800 million worldwide. That was an early Quad initiative that I think demonstrated that this group means business. We launched the Quad Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative as well, which shows that our 4 countries, and increasingly, I think a number of partners across the region, recognize if we're really going to maintain peace and stability, including in the region's maritime domains, the South China Sea, if we're going to combat illegal fishing across the Pacific, countries have to know what's happening in their maritime domains. And through the work of the Quad, we're able to provide that real-time data so countries know what's happening in their maritime domains, and then more importantly, we can work together with them to do something about it. We're also working increasingly on how do we deliver infrastructure to the region, whether that's subsea cable connectivity, whether that's delivering Open RAN technology to countries like Palau as well. And we've also transitioned our early work on COVID-19 vaccines into a broader health initiative across the region. Now, I really liked your question as well. It's not just what we're doing inside the Quad. What do we do to work with the rest of the region? And here's what I would say is that when we first launched the Quad, I think some partners in the region were asking, I'm sure they were probably having the same discussions with you, what is the Quad? What is it not? How is it going to deal with us? And, you know, for example, very early on, we had a number of very intense questions with friends in ASEAN who were worried about, is this somehow challenging ASEAN or duplicating or supplanting? And I think we've made such tremendous progress there because we were able to state every one of the members of the Quad formally states that we support ASEAN centrality, that we embrace the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. Not only are we not there to somehow challenge or supplant ASEAN there, we are there to support. We are all invested in ASEAN's success. And I think that's led to really great cooperation between Quad and ASEAN, for example, on vaccine delivery. And again, the pressure we feel every day is to make sure the Quad makes a tangible difference in the lives of people across the region. I'm really proud of the progress we made.
Can I just follow up?
Please.
And I know Mireya is going to take us to a slightly different geography within the region. is you hear the PRC often label the Quad and other minilaterals as hampering regional cohesion and openness, or stability for that matter. How would you respond to that critique that comes from Beijing?
I think it's outrageous and completely off base. That's what I would say. It's surprising to me when I hear some of the excuses come from friends in Beijing criticizing what America's approach to the region is. And what I would say to that is every single one of these groupings that we're engaged in is focused on an affirmative agenda. How do we maintain a stable, peaceful region? How do we deliver tangible, concrete benefits to partners in the region? I'll let friends in Beijing speak to what their concerns might be, but again, we find them completely without merit. Now, since you brought up China specifically, I will say, though, we've been very clear in our China strategy that we see our relationship with China in primarily competitive terms. But we're also absolutely committed to managing that competition in the most responsible way possible. I just had the pleasure of traveling to Beijing and to Shanghai with Secretary Blinken. I was able to travel a week before that to Beijing to help set up that trip. And we continue to explain that our China strategy has three pillars. We talk about invest, align, compete. We're investing in the sources of our strength at home. We're aligning with allies, partners, and friends. And then we're competing aggressively and without apology across a range of domains. We're also open to cooperation with China as well. What I've found in every single one of my conversations with partners across the Indo-Pacific is that they appreciate our approach to China. They appreciate the fact that we're clear-eyed about the challenge. I think they appreciate equally the fact that we're committed to engagement and responsible management of that relationship as well. And I think that helps give them the confidence to partner with us as well and to, quite frankly, ignore and to push back on some of the specious arguments that friends in Beijing make.
Great. So I think my question then fits here because I think from this conversation we have highlighted the economic potential of the region, how it's becoming more interconnected through these laterals, through investment infrastructure and so forth. So there's a lot of the affirmative agenda that's already unfolding before our eyes. But this is also a region that has some substantial security challenges. And one of them is in the Korea Peninsula and the DPRK's statements, a more hostile rhetoric vis-a-vis the South. They're concerned that there could be a nuclear cascade that could threaten the stability of the region. So as much as we care for the Indo-Pacific for its economic, technological potential, we also care because of these serious security challenges. So what is the Biden administration doing with respect to these risks that I have highlighted when it comes to North Korea? And how is the United States working with partners like South Korea, Japan, and others to address these issues?
Great questions, Mireya. And if we're going to talk about security challenges across the region, we should probably talk about the South China Sea, East China Sea, Taiwan Strait as well, but specifically on the Korean Peninsula. Look, what we've tried to do is demonstrate our commitment to the security of our allies and partners in the region and our commitment to countering the growing threat posed by the North Korean nuclear and missile programs. Now, we've simultaneously indicated that we remain open to diplomacy with Pyongyang, diplomacy without conditions. Unfortunately, the only response we've received thus far from the DPRK has been more missile launches. And so while that door to diplomacy remains open, I think we've had no choice but to double down on our security arrangements, again, particularly with the Republic of Korea and Japan, and no one should doubt the ironclad nature of our security commitments to those allies. We've also doubled down with a large international coalition of partners who continue to enforce sanctions against North Korea. And I think given North Korea's unwillingness to respond to our offer of diplomacy, we've been left with no choice but to focus on these harder elements of our strategy. I think if you look at the state visit by South Korean President Yoon here last year, if you look at the state visit Prime Minister Kishida just a few weeks ago, you can see a real clear-eyed focus on the North Korea challenge, and then particularly, I think, coming out of Camp David and buttressed by the really historic rapprochement and courage shown by leaders in Seoul and Tokyo. Our trilateral cooperation has also really reached unprecedented levels, and we have to be candid that a lot of that cooperation is designed to counter this growing threat from North Korea. But again, that trilateral cooperation also extends much more broadly across the entire region, and we can talk further about that as well. But that's what I would say about the North Korea challenge. There are many challenges across the Indo-Pacific. This remains one of the most significant, and we're certainly focused on it on a daily basis.
And if I can just follow up, since you mentioned there are different challenges, the North Korea issue is one, but the South China Sea and Taiwan cross-strait issues. If I can just ask you on the last one, how does Taiwan policy fit within the broader Indo-Pacific strategy of the U.S., and how do you think about security challenges across the Taiwan Strait?
Thank you, Mireya. Well, the way I would describe it is, look, we're trying to present a vision here that America's own security and prosperity is dependent on the maintenance of peace and stability across the Indo-Pacific region. And I think that that is perhaps best demonstrated by the fact that America, for more than 4 decades now, has been focused on maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. We think peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait has to be a matter of international concern. We often focus on the fact that 50% of the world's global container traffic flows to the Taiwan Strait. 90% of the world's high-end chips are coming out of Taiwan. Taiwan increasingly plays a central role in the global economy and is one of America's top trading partners. So if there were ever to be any threat to peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, that would obviously have very significant regional and global implications. So again, our entire strategy is focused on maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, maintaining the status quo. Our One China policy, which is defined by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, and the 6 assurances, has helped maintain peace and stability across that strait for 45 years now. I think we've got the right policy and the right approach, but we do have to recognize that China has increased its use of pressure and coercion across the strait directed at Taiwan. And so we have to use the tools that we have under the Taiwan Relations Act and working with other partners in the region to work to maintain that stability and deter the risk of any precipitous action. That's our focus. But again, we are the party of the status quo focused on maintaining peace and stability. Certainly, we pay very close attention to this. I think we're in an important period now following the January presidential election in Taiwan, in the run-up to the May 20 presidential inauguration in Taipei in just a few days. But again, our focus will be squarely on maintaining peace and stability, and I'm confident we can meet the challenge.
Thank you.
If we had been speaking a decade ago, we would have likely had mention of cross-strait ties, South China Sea, many of the relationships you talked about. A set of countries we might not have heard about that much is the Pacific Island states.
True.
And you've mentioned them several times today, and the administration has spent a fair bit of effort and time on that region. Why do the Pacific Island states matter so much to our strategy?
Well, Tanvi, thanks for the question. I often joke, the other surprise in my job as the AP Assistant Secretary is I often feel like I'm the senior Pacific Islands desk officer because I'm really proud of the investments that we've made as an administration in the Pacific Islands, and I've spent a tremendous amount of time working on these issues, and it's extraordinarily gratifying. We have long-standing cultural and historical links to the Pacific. We are a Pacific nation ourselves. If you think about Hawaii and Guam and the Marianas and American Samoa. You think about all of our deep people-to-people ties across the region. You think about historically just how strategic the Pacific has been, not just to the United States, but partners around the region. That's why, based on that recognition, we've really tried to step up our engagement across the region. President Biden hosted 2 Pacific Island summits at the White House, really just extraordinary events. And our whole approach to that, Tanvi, was we said to the Pacific Islanders, we want to meet you where you live. We want to understand what your interests and concerns are. And so what we did is we looked at the Pacific Island Forum's own 2050 strategy on the Blue Pacific continent and identified what are their top concerns. You look at that document, they talk about the risk, the existential risk posed by climate change, by illegal fishing, the need for investment in infrastructure. And then we tried to center our engagement and our investments around those issues. So that's why the Pacific matters, and that's why we're stepping up our game. We're doing it by increasing our diplomatic footprint on the ground. I talked about 2 new embassies just in the last year, 2 more on the way. We have our first ever special envoy to the Pacific Island Forum. We've made these unprecedented infrastructure investments across the region. We brought the Peace Corps back to many countries across the Pacific Islands. The USAID has established a new presence in Fiji that covers the region, the U.S. Coast Guard, the U.S. military. We're bringing all elements, I think, of American engagement and power to the cause, but underscoring what I said at the very top, that we know we can't do this alone, and we're more effective when we do it together with partners. We launched the Partners in the Blue Pacific, which has brought together a number of Asian and European partners who, like us, share the view that the Pacific matters more than ever before. And so we're working with the Partners in the Blue Pacific to do things like deliver collectively on infrastructure investments, maritime domain awareness investments, work to counter illegal fishing. I told a group of Pacific Island diplomats the other day that it's one of the most satisfying parts of my job, and I feel like engagement with our friends in the Pacific makes me a better diplomat and a better person. Their focus on relationships and family, their recognition of their desire to partner with the United States and other like-minded nations. I told people following the 2 presidential Pacific Island summits, I've never met a group that sent a stronger demand signal for American engagement. It's quite moving. It's incredibly important. Thanks for asking.
China has already come up in our conversation this morning, but there's one angle that we have not yet discussed, and that is growing cooperation between China and Russia, both bilaterally, but also in terms of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or BRICS. I wonder if you could talk about if you see any cooperation between China and Russia in the Indo-Pacific. What do you make of it, and how do you see that dynamic going forward?
Well, Mireya, thank you. Really important question. I have been profoundly concerned. We as the U.S. government have been profoundly concerned by this growing nexus between Moscow and Beijing. We've seen tangible manifestations of that nexus on the battlefield in Ukraine. And I think you've seen, particularly over the last several weeks, the United States has made crystal clear how deeply concerned we are with China's aggressive support in reconstituting the Russian defense industrial base, to the point now where the Russian military has newfound abilities to impact and threaten the battlefield in Ukraine, and unfortunately, the means to threaten and undermine European security writ large. And so we've underscored that China needs to curb that support, and China can't have it both ways. China can't underscore that it wants a positive relationship with Europe and the United States. At the same time, it's fueling the Russian war machine, and perhaps the greatest threat that we've seen to European security in some time. And I think that cooperation really was first manifested in the February 4, 2022 joint statement between President Putin and President Xi, the so-called no limits friendship And, I've been concerned from the beginning by Section 3 on security in that document, which talks about essentially Moscow and Beijing's desire to dominate their so-called near adjacent regions. So I think that cooperation has been concerning. We're certainly worried about how that cooperation has manifested on the battlefield in Ukraine. But you're right, Mireya, I think there are implications elsewhere. We've seen joint security patrols in the Indo-Pacific as well that are concerning. So it's something that we obviously pay very close attention to. It was a pretty central feature of Secretary Blinken's visit to Beijing as well, and I think, unfortunately, will probably continue to be so.
So if I can ask a follow-up question, and as you mentioned, Secretary Blinken was recently in China, and I believe that there has been an effort from the United States and China to stabilize relations, to have better communication channels. It's a competitive relationship, but it's one that should be handled with care and responsibly. So my question is it possible to keep this track of stabilization given so many stressors, the sale of dual-use goods, the Chinese harassment of Filipino votes in the South China Sea, and I can have a long list of things that, are problematic. So how do you make sure that you don't derail from the stabilization goal while addressing these other concerns?
Well, great question, Mireya. I really appreciate National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan's phrase that he came up with. Intense competition between the United States and China requires intense diplomacy. We do believe in intense diplomacy directly with the People's Republic of China. As I've also described here today, our strategy is much broader. Our China strategy is much broader than just engagement with China. I've talked about, again, the really historic investments that the Biden-Harris administration has made in the United States. The aligned piece of our China strategy, what we've been talking about here all morning, this unprecedented cooperation with allies and partners, is, from my vantage, from the State Department's vantage, maybe the most important part of our China strategy. But certainly direct diplomacy plays a role. Part of it, Mireya, you're absolutely right. We have to have channels of communication open. We have to understand one another better and have the ability to be exceptionally direct and clear with Chinese counterparts so as to increase our chances of avoiding a miscalculation that could lead to some kind of a crisis or even a conflict. But I'll also say, Mireya, what we've discovered through our diplomacy over the last year is as complex and as consequential as the U.S.-China relationship is, as contentious as it is, there are some areas where we can cooperate and are doing so. Certainly, I think coming out of the San Francisco summit between President Biden and President Xi, the agreement we announced to cooperate on curbing the flow of precursor chemicals out of China that's fueling the fentanyl crisis in the United States. That was probably the most significant outcome. We've made really significant initial progress, but a lot more remains to be done. I think opening up our mill channels has been pretty significant, and we've seen positive impact as well in a reduction in the number of unsafe encounters in the region. And I think those channels staying open has helped contribute to stability. As I mentioned, I was just with Secretary Blinken in Beijing. He's had certainly probably more than half a dozen engagements with his Chinese counterpart. I've done the same with the National Security Advisor and his engagements, and certainly the president's as well. But I do want to underscore, we're clear-eyed about the challenge that we face. Getting together and engaging diplomatically with our Chinese counterparts is not always pleasant, and it's often tense as well. But we try to be as clear and as professional and as productive as possible. Maybe a final point I'll make, Mireya, that's been really striking to me. I've been struck by how many, again, allies and partners have praised our diplomatic approach to the challenge posed by the People's Republic of China, because they see it as being clear-eyed, but also committed to managing their relationship responsibly. I think almost every partner in the region, they always say, don't make us choose between the United States and China. That's not our game. We don't ask anybody to do that, but we do insist on ensuring that all countries have choices and can make their own decisions free from coercion. And simultaneously, as much as partners appreciate our clear-eyed approach, nobody wants a crisis, nobody wants a conflict. And so I think partners have been reassured by that diplomacy. And as I indicated, I think they've been more willing to work closely with us as a result.
Thank you.
Before we turn to audience questions, just one final question from me on the broader strategy that you talked about. And you said it's not just a China strategy, it's an Indo-Pacific strategy.
Absolutely.
If it succeeds, if we're looking kind of 40 years from now, what would the region look like?
I love this question. I was asked this a while ago, and I was like, thank you for making me think, because it's a rare privilege in this job sometimes. I guess the simplest and hopefully the clearest answer I could give, Tanvi, would be this strategy will be a success if 40 years from now the Indo-Pacific region continues to remain at peace, where the Indo-Pacific region continues to be comprised by a number of sovereign states who can make their own decisions of their own free will without being subject to coercion. If the region is not dominated by any one country, if commerce flows freely throughout the maritime domains, if we've countered the threat posed by climate change, if we've prevented pandemic disease, if we've continued to maintain peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and in the South China Sea, if we've continued to develop tangible benefits to the region, like investments in the region's infrastructure, in connecting all countries, including in the Pacific Islands, to the global communications network. If we can do all of that, that will be an unprecedented success. Those are the goals of this strategy. I think that the rules-based order from which we've all benefited over the last more than 70 years is undergirded by that sense of all countries, large and small, playing by the same rules, all countries operating in accordance with international law. That's the kind of region that we've benefited from. It's the kind of region that we're committed to. And when you and I sit down and do this 40 years from now, let's see how we've done.
Well, thank you very much. I think given that vision of a peaceful, stable, prosperous region is something that's widely shared, and we appreciate the work you do every day to make sure we get there.
Thank you.
But now I would like to bring the audience for some questions. We have mics, and I'll take 2 questions at a time. If you can please keep your question short and identify yourself, and then we'll go with this lady and then the gentleman in the center.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink. Bin Ruang with Phoenix TV.
Nice to see you.
Nice to meet you too. As you just mentioned, intensive competition requires intensive diplomacy.
Yes.
And just recently, we have seen intense diplomacy between the U.S. and China comes with intensive sanctions and tariffs on China. I'm just wondering if this administration is escalating a trade war with China. And how does this complicate your effort, or your diplomatic effort with China? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then a second question from the gentleman.
Stanley Kober, I have a feeling of deja vu when I listen to you. We've had alliances before, CETO, CENTO. Deterrence didn't work. We lost the war. CETO and CENTO no longer exist. What's different this time?
Great questions. All right, this is the best part of the event. Look, my friend from Phoenix, the answer is no. What are we focused on? We're focused on defending American workers and companies and the American economy from unfair Chinese trade practices. That's what we're doing. And we're doing so because we have seen over several decades now, but certainly in the last several years, many of the unfair and distortionary aspects of the Chinese economy have had an adverse impact on the American economy and American workers and American communities. And we're taking steps to address those. And we've signaled for some time now that we're not going to sit idly by while China engages in these unfair trade practices, including the theft of American intellectual property and flooding not just American but other overseas markets with unfairly low-priced or below-cost goods. So that's what the response is, and we've made that clear through our diplomacy as well. Certainly, the economic relationship between the United States and China remains important, depending on how you calculate anywhere between $500 billion and $700 billion of annual trade. When Secretary Blinken was in Beijing, he had a really important interaction with the American business community there. So we'll focus on that relationship, but we're also going to focus on making sure that relationship is fair. President Biden always says he has great confidence in American workers. They can compete with anyone across the globe as long as the playing field is fair and balanced. On alliances and partnerships, my friend, here's what I would say. I think the challenges we face in the 21st century are unprecedented. And I think that's why I'm so grateful that I think the cooperation between our like-minded partners that I've tried to describe here today has also reached unprecedented levels. I would quibble with your question because I don't think the bar or the gauge of success of our strategy is whether we are able to prevent every problem and challenge and conflict in the world. I would still argue, if you take the long-term view, for the past 70 years, America's security and alliance relationships have contributed to peace and stability across the globe. Despite significant challenges, that's been true in Europe, that's been true in Asia, and I'm confident it'll be true for many decades going forward.
We'll take another round of questions over here, and then let's go over here.
Thanks, Tanvi. Sarang Shidore, Director of the Global South Program at the Quincy Institute.
Nice to see you.
Pleasure. I loved your comment on ASEAN centrality. I think it's a wonderful goal and certainly very important to reiterate. I would suggest just a couple of things that to me appear to be at variance with it, and love your comments on that.
Please.
One of them is the fact that the way the Quad looks at China and ASEAN looks at China is quite different. ASEAN has had ASEAN +3, EAS, ARF, all that. Quad has a different approach to China. Second, there is the IPEF, which is a great initiative compared to what we had prior, which was not a whole lot. So this is wonderful, and I think you deserve congratulations for that. But IPEF appears to engage states in ASEAN bilaterally, not as ASEAN. So this is not an IPEF ASEAN conversation, but IPEF member state XYZ. And of course, ASEAN's biggest successes have been in economic integration. So it would make sense if ASEAN centrality was indeed central to have that kind of regional engagement. And lastly, Philippines with the EDCA sites. Now, there's a good reason for them, given what China is up to. But nevertheless, they have widened a space between the Philippines and its ASEAN neighbors. And it may be a collateral effect, but nevertheless, that adds to the whole thing. So we'd love your comments. Thank you.
Great question. Let me see if I can remember them all. First of all, look, I'm a true believer in ASEAN. We talk about our shared future with the 1 billion people of ASEAN in the United States, right? More than 650 million people across ASEAN. ASEAN collectively represents, again, depending on how you count, either the world's 4th or 5th largest economy. So we truly believe in ASEAN centrality. We believe in investing in ASEAN as an institution and in collaborating with the 10, again, soon to be 11 individual member states of ASEAN. So we truly believe in ASEAN's potential. And also, this is the world's youngest, most dynamic, rapidly growing region in the world. Our future is also inextricably tied to what happens across Southeast Asia. And also, as I indicated earlier, ASEAN is, for much of the region, is really the only institutional architecture that we have, focused not just on the challenges of Southeast Asia, but provides a platform for really most of the world's great powers to engage. Now, certainly our economic and trading relationship with ASEAN is really important to that. 7 out of 10 ASEAN members are also IPEF members. Our theory of the case is, at least at the initial stage, we wanted IPEF to be most successful by bringing together economies that we thought were most like-minded and most capable at meeting the high standards towards which we're striving throughout the 4 pillars in the IPEF agreement. So that's why it is an individual, it's a collection of 14 different like-minded economies as opposed to a U.S. ASEAN economic engagement agreement. We're really excited that we've already reached substantial agreement across 3 of IPEF's 4 pillars. That would be point 1. Point 2, we're always open in the future to the possibility of expanding IPEF further, depending on how it develops. And the most important point I'd make at the end, irrespective of the progress we've made on IPEF, it doesn't in any way undermine our substantial investment and engagement across ASEAN. And certainly, I'll be hosting many of my ASEAN counterparts here in Washington in just a few weeks. I'll be traveling out to Vientiane to meet with other senior officials. I think you'll see the Secretary and others, again, investing in and participating in the ASEAN-related events. There will be no mistaking the strength of America's commitment to ASEAN. Look, on the Philippines, EDCA, the South China Sea, I would say I don't know of any country in ASEAN that supports being pushed around or being bullied by any country, whether that's China or anybody else. We continue to engage on maritime issues in the ASEAN context, but I think particularly given the pressure that the Philippines is under right now, probably the most important work we're doing is bilateral with our Filipino allies. We've made crystal clear for the entire world, including friends in Beijing, no one should ever question the strength of our mutual defense treaty commitments to the Philippines. We'll continue to invest in the Philippines' capacity to monitor and defend their own maritime interests. But our goal here, as I indicated earlier, is maintaining peace and stability across the South China Sea. And I know that every member of ASEAN that I engage with supports that wholeheartedly.
I'm afraid we've run out of time for questions from the room,
sorry.
but I do want to.
Do you want to do one last one?
One last one from an online.
We'll go out on the high wire.
We got an online question, which I thought is a good, Mireya, and I thought was a good one to end the session, from David Schofield, who asks, "What keeps you awake at night?"
Well, yeah, the things that I probably worry most about are, I'm a very simple person, kind of believe in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Let's keep the region peaceful and stable. And if we can do that, then we can grapple with every other problem. So the issues that I probably worry about the most are the security issues that we talked about here today, because without security, we can't address any of these other challenges. So I think we remain pretty seized in ensuring that we maintain peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, make sure that we deter the threats emanating from North Korea. But if I were to flip that question on its head, if those are the issues that maybe occasionally keep me awake at night, what are the issues where I actually spend the bulk of my time? It's everything we've talked about here today. It's work on our affirmative agenda. I think I have the best job in the world because I get to work with all of these like-minded partners and friends that we've been talking about here today, doing unprecedented, exciting things, working on an affirmative agenda. It's always much more exciting and I think satisfying to work on an affirmative agenda rather than worrying exclusively about the challenges.
On behalf of Mireya Solís, our Center for Asia Policy Studies Director, and myself, please join me in thanking Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink. And thank you to all of you as well. If you could remain seated while Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink departs so he can make a speedy exit, please keep seated. And thank you again for joining us.
Can I give one shout out to my good friend Bob Wong, sitting in the back row, one of America's greatest diplomats, former Deputy Chief of Mission in Beijing and boss and mentor. He's the guy who should be giving this presentation. Maybe you'll have him up here next time, Bob. It's really nice to see you. But thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of our friends here at Brookings. Tanvi, Mireya, thank you. This was a real pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to our next event.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.